With just days to go before the presidential election, 9 days, it's becoming increasingly evident that former President Donald Trump is running a shadow foreign policy. In the days before Israel's retaliatory strike on Iran yesterday, Donald Trump told a rally crowd in the state of Georgia that, quote, Bibi, as he calls Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, called him twice in as many days. A week ago, Trump boasted of a telephone conversation which they had because Trump claims the prime minister, quote, wants my view on things. Trump also said this week that he would use force to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, something which he reportedly wanted to do in the immediate days after he lost the 2020 election, even asking his top advisors in an Oval Office meeting what options he had. Speaking of Iran, Trump is also apparently conducting a shadow foreign policy with one of Tehran's important allies, Russia's Vladimir Putin. Responding to a report that he has had numerous phone calls with Putin since leaving office, Trump said it would be a, quote, smart thing if he did, but he denies that he has. Last week, U.S. intelligence agencies announced in a new assessment that Russia is continuing to work to benefit Donald Trump this election cycle, warning that, quote, Russian actors are considering and in some cases implementing a broad range of influence efforts timed with the election. Some of these are aimed at inciting violence and calling into question the validity of democracy. Others are aimed at amplifying false information and conspiracy that may exacerbate post-election tensions. And late Friday night, U.S. intelligence agencies announced that, quote, Russian actors manufactured and amplified a recent video that falsely depicted an individual ripping up ballots in Pennsylvania, end quote. Now, this type of Russian influence is currently going on in other countries with important elections as well. The recent election in Moldova, which had to do with that country's future in the EU, was hit with, quote, unprecedented Russian influence, per the Moldovan president Maya Sandu, allegations echoed by the EU and the United States. Moldovan authorities also alleged a Russian-linked multi-million-dollar vote-buying scheme and a Russian scheme that plotted civil unrest in Moldova around the referendum. That referendum wound up, by a very slim margin, passing in favor of enshrining the goal of Moldova joining the European Union. A similar situation with different results has been unfolding in the country of Georgia, the place that the Trump campaign recently featured in an ad when asking people to register to vote in the U.S. state of Georgia. But yesterday, in the country of Georgia, the Eastern European country, it held what was widely viewed as the country's most important parliamentary election since gaining independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, pitting the Russian-friendly anti-Western Georgian Dream Party, led by a billionaire businessman named Bidzina Ivanishvili, who made his fortune in Russia following the collapse of the USSR, against a coalition of pro-Western opposition parties. Like Ukraine, Georgia has also been invaded by Russia during a deadly and destructive short war in 2008, and Russia still occupies 20% of Georgia. Ahead of voting, at least one Russian disinformation campaign aimed at the election was alleged by a Georgian monitoring group, and multiple claims of election fraud were made yesterday. Violence, intimidation, and bribery were also reported. And in an outcome fraught with controversy, Ivanishvili's Georgian dream has been declared the winner, putting the country's future in the EU into question and aligning it closer with Russia. The journalist Terrell Starr, host of Black Diplomats on YouTube, whose coverage from the early days of the Ukraine war was spotlighted heavily on this show, is in Georgia. He's reporting from Georgia with the support of the Pulitzer Center. He spoke to voters about their thoughts on Georgia's election and America's upcoming one.
Why did you vote against Georgia Dream?
Because I think Georgian Dream is under Russian influence. The oligarch Ivanishvili is Putin's personal representative in Georgia, and I don't want like that. I want democracy in Georgia, and I want European Union, Western civilization.
And do you think that Trump is better for Georgia or Kamala Harris?
No, Kamala Harris is better, of course. Because we don't know about Trump's and Putin's relationships.
Who do you think is better for Georgia, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
I think that more Kamala Harris.
What do you think about Donald Trump?
Well, okay. What do I think about Donald Trump? I would definitely vote for Kamala Harris.
What do you think about Donald Trump?
I think he a bit crazy, but I support him.
And of course, Terrell continues to report from Georgia. Our thanks to Terrell in the Pulitzer Center for that reporting.